My name is Cody, and I survived 7 years of extreme drug abuse. I am in active recovery. I have been clean since June 27th of 2021, and this is how it started. Really, there's no reasoning growing up for me to have started. I didn't have a tough childhood. I didn't have, my parents were great. My family was great. We got drug tested in high school. I smoked weed during the summer. Obviously, with smoking weed, you'll fail a drug test. And even with me driving to school, when I wasn't in sports anymore, we would still get drug tested. So I ended up finding something called K2 that you wouldn't fail a drug test on. And it's weird because every drug that I've ever done, I can remember the person I got it from for the first time, who my plug was, and for some odd reason with the K2, I couldn't tell you where I got it from, when I got it, how I ended up finding out who would even sell it. But I remember the night using it, and obviously I didn't know the severity of it at the time. K2 is synthetic marijuana. K2, spice, and out of all the drugs I had ever been on, I think K2 takes the cake. I think K2 is, in my opinion, the most dangerous, and I think by far the most addicting. K2 is my first drug of choice. I started smoking it one night with friends, and obviously me being the one who could get it, I was the one who also took it home and would bring it the next times we would smoke. And obviously it just kind of led down a trail of I was the one who had it, so I went from smoking with my friends to then smoking at home when my parents would leave. I guess I was 17 at the time, a junior in high school or so, or a sophomore. A lot of that time is gone. But I started smoking it, and it just led to a point where I was with friends one night, we were smoking it, and when I woke up the next morning, it's like I had the flu times a million. I mean, I hands and knees, dry heaving, throwing up. It was felt like the most sick I had ever been. And a buddy of mine who was there had went through K2 addiction prior. He had already come out of it, and as I was on my hands and knees, dry heaving, he loaded up a bowl and handed it to me and told me to take a hit. And obviously in the moment, being chemically dependent, well, I didn't even know what it was. I didn't really understand addiction at the time, obviously, because I had never been an addict. And on my hands and knees, I cleared that bowl, and as I blew the smoke out, I stood up like nothing had ever happened. And he broke the news to me really in a sense of like, damn, like you're addicted to spice. Obviously a million thoughts and emotions went through my head in that moment. Number one being I'm fucked. I mean, I'm still in high school. I live at home with my parents, and the harsh reality of I now have to use this to breathe, in a sense. I now have to use this to survive, because now I can't physically go without it. And when you talk about parents being home and being in school and having to hide it from the world, essentially, was a tough thing to process. I went home that same day and woke my dad up and told him, like, I fucked up. Like, I fucked up heavy. And then that led to three years or so battling the K2 addiction. I was not ready. I was not ready. I didn't have any addicts in the family. I'd never known anybody who struggled with abuse. I had friends who smoked weed and things like that, but I I never met someone who was dependent on their drug of choice. I had known about alcoholism and things like that, or when people couldn't stop drinking, but I went into it blind. I think a real big misconception with addiction, and it can lead to a ton of arguments and things like that, but and some addicts even disagree with me, but the biggest misconception is I never chose. I chose to start using that drug, but I never chose to become addicted to it. If I would have known back then that I was gonna get to a point where I couldn't live without the stuff. At that time, K2 wasn't studied, so it really wasn't, there was no Google reviews, there was no Reddit entries, there was no information on it whatsoever. I knew it used to be sold in stores. I knew they banned it from stores, but from that point, when it was sold in stores to the point where I started using it, it was two completely different drugs. When it was sold in stores, it was just there was a couple chemicals that were combined together and it would give you this euphoric feeling. By the time I got my hands on it, it was those chemicals plus embalming fluid. And I had watched a guy one time, he had a tub full of it. And it's almost like if you were to go home to your kitchen sink, and up under your sink you have like the Raid, like the roach killer, the wasp spray, the Windex, all of those chemicals that you use to clean or kill roaches or what have you, they put it in a tub and just spray all of it. They take each bottle and just spray over it and mix it all together, and essentially you're inhaling every chemical known to man, it felt like. The addiction with that, I never thought I was gonna get out of. I told my dad that day, and obviously we looked into options. I ended up going to ADAC, an outpatient center for drug rehabilitation, and went through the outpatient there, failed, never got off of it. We started looking into rehabs and sent me to the first one. I was so sick that I was a liability for them. So I got sent home from that one and then ended up finding another one, which was a beautiful place. I mean, I definitely didn't stay long enough. I should have stayed 90 days and I stayed, I think, 9. I went home and I knew when I was there that I wasn't gonna get clean. I think subconsciously I knew it. Obviously at that point I wanted, the last year and a half or so being on K2, I would cry myself to sleep at night. It was miserable. I mean, the lengths that I would go, the miles that I would walk, the friendships that I would lose over just trying to get my hands on a bag. It was unreal. I mean, but I had to. That was all that was in my mind. I was either gonna use or I was gonna be on my deathbed, it felt like. And I got out of rehab and was clean for 60 days, I think, and relapsed very hard again. And it's almost like each relapse got worse every time. Whether it was the withdrawals that got worse or the amount that I was using, it's almost just like it got worse. And finally I understood that I'm gonna die on this stuff. I mean, I would have, to put it into perspective, I've known people who have gotten stuck in a trance on K2. People have lost their lives off of their first use. And the place that I was in was, I got a call from a plug telling me, he asked me, he said, have you heard about the 15 people that were at that park in Houston? I was like, what about them? Obviously we're not in Houston, so I don't know why I would have heard about it, but he said 15 people went to the emergency room off of a batch of spice. And I was like, why are you telling me? Like, you're, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're selling me this stuff. And he told me, he said, I have that batch. And I just told him to save everything he had. Like, I wanted that one. I didn't want anything else. I needed that one. And it got to a point where I knew it was gonna be death. I mean, I was playing Russian roulette essentially with a substance that was gonna kill me at some point. I was very aware of the fact, and sadly was almost just kind of waiting for it. I was just going to use until that happened. Because then when that would happen, it would be over. I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. I wouldn't have to worry about the stress and anxiety of having to make money to get some, or having to find somebody else when my plug was out, or the worry of my parents and family. Something changed one day, and I told my dad to grab a tent, a case of water, and to take me out to the deer lease. It was 25 degrees outside. I wanted to go through withdrawals in the worst spot imaginable. Not in a house where it's warm and I can lay in bed, but the most harsh conditions, essentially, that we had around us. So I went and stayed out in a tent at the deer lease in cold weather, was very sick, and then I put it down. I finally put K2 down, and I will never understand where my mind went, but I knew that I had finally beat it, but my mind was gone. I mean, the years of abuse, my mind, it just wasn't there. So I thought it would be a good idea to make a mental bucket list of all the drugs known to man and start checking them off one by one, as if that was a good idea, which led me to abusing meth for a long time. For probably about a year, used it every way possible, ending with banging it or intravenous. Finally put that down, and then here was Xanax and alcohol, which led to a couple of arrests. 2 years of my life where I don't know what happened. I was blacked out every day, putting my parents through constant worry, which was, out of all of it, the worst. There was nothing worse than that one. There was nothing worse than that one. My dad coming in every night to check if I was breathing, having to pull food out of my mouth because I passed out while eating when I got home from taking a handful of Xanax and drinking a bottle of liquor. It was unreal. And then I, after my multiple arrests and all of that good stuff, I ended up on perks, Oxy 30s, which were nothing but fentanyl, knowingly doing it. And that one, there was a lot of nights while on fentanyl where I had a few, I wouldn't call them homeboys, but people around me who had already taken Xanax that was fentanyl and didn't wake up, who used other substances that was not what they thought it was, that was fentanyl and overdosed. So there's a lot of nights I spent where I was genuinely nervous to go to sleep because I knew, like, in a very realistic sense, my heart may stop beating before I wake up in the morning, which obviously wasn't enough to stop me from continuing use. And then I guess you could say it got to a point where I knew that somehow I was worth more. First and foremost, my family was worth more than to have me be doing what I was doing. I deserved more as a person. My parents deserved not to find me dead. And I put it down. I don't know how. The grace of God, really. Even with all the support and everything, it was a long 7 years before I finally had the strength to truly go for it. Because that's the thing with addiction is, my parents did everything they could. I begged them to give up. And I can now talk about it without bawling like a baby, but I begged them to give up. It was, I was a lost cause in my mind. When I finally had let it go, I didn't know how, but I just knew that I was gonna roll with it and see where we could go with it, because I was finally ready to get clean. Everyone can fight tooth and nail for you just like they did for me, but until I was ready, I wasn't getting clean. Like I said, for the longest time, I thought I was just gonna use until I was not alive anymore. Again, by the grace of God, I was ready to get clean, and I've now been clean since June 27th of 2021. That almost got me. And going back to what I said on, I never knew how I was going to repay my parents. Not just financially of rehab and all the money I borrowed or stole, but for the years of the constant worry. It's almost, you almost can't pay it back. Or so I thought. I started seeing the trust come back, the worry start to fade. And though I haven't just straight up asked them in a long time, but they don't worry anymore. Obviously, as an addict in recovery, there's always a chance. I have to be on my toes. I can't slip. Some people can and can get right back up. I know some that have been doing it for 30 years. They'll be clean for this amount of time and have a relapse and then get back onto it a couple days later and go for another couple of years. I don't think I can do that. I think if I were to slip, I think that would probably be it. So I just don't. And I have more people relying on me than just me relying on myself. Being in recovery has brought me to living a life of happiness, really. About to have a baby, have 2 children at home, have a fiance, having my parents see all this and like I said, have that worry fade, which has made me realize that that's the way I pay them back, because that's all they've ever wanted is live their life without having to worry about me. I don't think there's any feeling that tops that. Knowing that the constant state that I put them in of that worry and panic and fear to now giving them a lifetime of joy from here on out, there's no better feeling. And now I've now been able to bring it back full circle. And I am now a youth recovery coach for kids who are battling addiction, battling, self-harm, tough home lives. And it again, full circle back to ADAC where I went back in 2016. So to be able to go through all that I went through and now be able to help others is a blessing, with probably a lot of luck involved, and just the willpower just to, again, not have that slip. The biggest thing that I tell other addicts who are trying to get clean or just people who are struggling is, when I was in addiction, I would do anything. If I was about to start going through withdrawals, thank God I never did, but if I had to rob an old lady, yeah. So, but I would have done anything. And I started thinking about it when I was trying to get clean is, if I take all this time and energy and effort and will do whatever it takes to get my fix, if I could just transfer all of that and put it into staying clean, it's a walk in the park. It's easy. Because I know I would have done anything to get whatever my drug of choice was at that time. So if I just put it into my recovery and staying clean, and I'd be unstoppable. And I think that was the biggest thing that changed back in 2021 is I put all effort into staying sober, and just how grateful I am to be able to take everything that I've done and my mistakes and the hell on earth that I put myself through and try to help these kids not go down that path is something that I've dreamt of ever since getting clean. All I know is if I was able to turn things around and go from where I was to where I am now in going into recovery, anyone can. To the families who are struggling with their son battling addiction, or their parent or their cousin, or give yourself grace until that person's ready, they're not gonna get clean. So if you know anybody who's struggling with substance abuse or addiction, there's hotlines, there's outpatient drug rehabilitation centers, inpatient. There is help out there. You just have to go find it.